Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Thank you for joining us today. So a couple of disclaimers. The session is being recorded today and will be available for view on demand post-session. So if you do not wish to participate in a recorded session, this is your exit right now, so please disconnect. You will be placed in silence mode. However, you can ask questions during the Q&A and they'll be addressed at the appropriate moments as a part of the interactive session. You can also post comments and questions on social media using the hashtag QNX_platform. Once again, that is QNX_platform. And we will get started in a couple of moments. Thank you. Welcome to today's virtual conference, De-risking Software Safety Certification, How to Lead Your Organization to Certification Success, brought to you by IIoT World and sponsored by BlackBerry QNX. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Greg Orloff with IIoT World, and on behalf of my team, speakers, and sponsors, thank you for joining. We will be monitoring the online social channel, so feel free to send your questions in the Q&A box here in the Zoom platform, or you can also send them in via social media, Twitter, and otherwise using hashtag QNX_platform. And one lucky winner from the most active ones today, so hint, hint, please submit questions and thoughts, will be walking away with a copy of Chris Hobbs' book, Embedded Software Development for Safety Critical Systems. This will be announced at the end of the program. But before we dive into today's material, please allow me to give those of you who may be joining us for the first time a little bit of background. IIoT World is a digital media publication that covers the economic and technological implications of the transformation taking place as industrial IoT proliferates throughout the enterprise. IIoT World combines journalistic coverage with data analysis to expose the stories, players, trends, and innovations that are shaping the industrial Internet of Things. Analytica's 2020 report ranked IIoT World as the #1 global brand for industrial IoT. IIoT World was also recently ranked by K-Core Analytics as the #1 global influencer on several topics that include industrial IoT, smart manufacturing, ICS security, SCADA, predictive analytics, and predictive maintenance. And additionally, smart cities has been in the top 5 positions for the past couple of years. Our mission is to help companies create a culture of innovation and connect the smarts, industrial technology, manufacturing, sensors, and the CXO decision makers who seek these solutions. Today we have a session covering how to overcome the odds against successful safety certification from a renowned author and functional safety expert, Mr. Chris Hobbs. Successful certification requires business leaders to drive a company-wide safety culture and for development teams to adopt new processes as emerging safety standards transition from prescriptive to more goal-based orientation. We'll share practical advice for R&D leaders that he's gained over years of firsthand experience working on these types of projects. So today's agenda will help you to learn how to set your teams up for success when pursuing safety certification standards such as ISO 26262, UL 4600, and IEC 61508. We'll touch on how to develop sufficiently dependable software that meets available and reliability needs with minimum development effort, and why functional safety is paramount to staying competitive in today's world. As I mentioned, there will also be an interactive Q&A session at the end to ask questions and gain insights directly from Chris. Key topics that will be discussed today include building a company-wide safety culture and adapting to these processes as we've mentioned. Our speaker today, Mr. Chris Hobbs, is the author of the definitive book on functional safety, embedded software development for safety-critical systems, and a kernel developer and a functional safety course instructor at BlackBerry QNX. He's advised some of the largest industrial controls and automotive companies in the world as they've pursued safety certification. So make sure you submit your questions in the Q&A, and we'll be giving away a copy of his book, as I mentioned. Chris, welcome. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I hardly recognize myself. Let me share my screen. Okay, so yes, this is this is a brief webinar on de-risking software safety certification. I'm going to try to approach it from a slightly different angle from possibly what was expected here. Rather than, look, you should set up a team to do this and a team to do this, I want to look at what's driving the changes that are being made at the moment and the changes that are happening. I'd like this to be interactive. I'm monitoring the questions, and if a question comes up on something I've just spoken about, I will try to answer it in line. Otherwise, we'll answer the questions, as Greg said, at the end. So yes, please put the questions in as we go. Before we start, before I dive in, I'd like to know where we are, whom I'm talking with. It's awkward because, of course, having to prepare slides beforehand, they're static. So finding out whom I'm talking to is not going to help change, and not going to change the slides, but it could possibly help me change the way I am speaking and the way I'm addressing things. So there's a poll that I'd like you to take part in, and I will hand back to the poller. There we are. Which best describes your company's involvement with safety certification? I'm not allowed to vote, it tells me. But I would like to know, so I've got some idea. Are you members of companies which have got a long history of taking product through certification, possibly hardware type products, and now looking at software, or so on? I assume the vote is in progress.
Correct. We've just given about 5 more seconds.
Okay.
And last chance, we got about 65% folks has taken the poll.
Well, it's better than some presidential campaigns I've known.
Here we go. We're going to display the results. And
okay, so the majority of people on the call have a history of taking products through certification and are continuing to do so. And next we have a tie for second place, and then we're monitoring what's happening. Okay, well, thank you very much. That gives me an idea to try. As I say, I can't change the slides. They had to be statically produced, which is the problem with slides rather than whiteboard. But yes, I can aim my comments possibly slightly in that direction. So I hope you're seeing my screen again. I'm going to start by having a look at 3 particular tragedies. On the 4th of October 1930, the R101, the largest airship in the world, left her base in Cardington in the UK for a maiden voyage to India. She was taking Lord Thompson to India, and this was basically going to be a demonstration of the dominance in technology of Great Britain compared to the rest of her empire as it was at that time. Lord Thompson had to be back in the UK by the 20th of October, and this flight had originally been planned for the beginning of September, but it didn't occur for reasons we'll look at later. 7.5 hours later, as most of you probably know, she crashed in France. 6 of the people on board survived, and there was an official inquiry launched, and that official inquiry is actually a very, very readable document and has been published as a book. I'm not sure if you can see the title there, but yes, this was published as a book quite recently and is very well worth reading, what happened and what led up to that tragedy. Second example, 2nd of September, now we're coming much more up to date, 2006. This adaptation of a Comet airliner took off from an airbase in Afghanistan, and it exploded a couple of hours later. There was an official inquiry put into place, and I have a copy of that under here, which we're going to talk about later, the Nimrod review. And again, a very, very, very readable document, and I would advise everybody to make sure they've read that Nimrod review. And the third one, of course, is one we're all very familiar with. The 737 MAX 8 took off last year in Addis Ababa and crashed almost immediately afterwards. And that inquiry reported a couple of weeks ago, about a month ago now, I suppose. So those are three tragedies. There is a common underlying theme, which I'm going to come back to later, on those three tragedies. Okay, so where am I going to go with this presentation? I believe that the way we have traditionally led a project through safety to a safe product at the end, of which part is getting a certification, is changing. And I think it's changing for a number of reasons. The complexity of the systems that we're now building are making the prescriptive metrics that we're used to in the standards, ISO this and IEC that and UL that, is making those inappropriate now. We are building much more accidental systems which we do not fully understand. And I'm reminded there of the work that was being done fairly recently on intellectual debt. I don't know if you've seen this, by Jonathan Citrain. He wrote an article on intellectual debt. His argument there was that we really do not understand the interaction of the systems we're building. He gives an example, nothing to do with our industries, but he gives an example of aspirin. Aspirin has been taken to reduce pain since the late 1800s, but nobody understood how it worked until 1995. So for about 100 years, we were taking aspirin without knowing how it worked. Now that's fine, because we know it works, and yep, there's no question it was effective. The problem, of course, is that as long as we do not understand why it works, we cannot understand we cannot predict how it's going to behave with other systems. And the argument is that we are building intellectual debt on the systems that we're building, that particularly each subsystem is becoming so complex that although it works, we cannot predict, we don't know why it works, and we can't, we don't know why it works, so we cannot predict how it's going to interact with other components. So our standards are moving towards goal-based, away from prescriptive standards, and we'll talk about exactly what that means in a moment, but towards going to, oh, we have a concern. This webinar is restarting several times. I noticed on the chat line there. I will carry on, see what happens. We are moving away from prescriptive standards towards goal-based standards. Demonstrate that your system is safe. That is something that can intimidate a lot of developers, because it's putting an awful lot more responsibility on those developers. On the other hand, it can inspire the best developers if there's good leadership. Safety case is becoming our predominant certification artifact. We are changing why we're doing testing and verification, and safety culture, as we suggested. There's a good question there coming in about intellectual debt. I will leave it to the end, if I may. So here are a few of the safety standards, very few of them. I believe I counted them not that long ago, and there were well over 100 safety standards that we could be talking about. 61508 in my world predominates, with the use of the 26262, 50128, and so on. The medical standards, I think, are out to some extent on the side, and we have the new SOTIF, safety of the intended functionality type standards. All of these traditional standards basically assume that as long as everything continues working, we will not get a dangerous situation. The UL 4600, ISO 21448, of course, with SOTIF, safety of the intended functionality, everything behaved exactly as it was designed to behave, yet we still got a dangerous situation. And I think the Boeing 737 MAX 8 is a good example of that. Every component in the MCAS system behaved as it was designed to behave. But, of course, we had tragedies resulting from it. I'd be interested to know, and we have a short poll on this, as to which of these industrial areas you are involved in. I wonder if we could put that poll up. I wonder if we could put that poll up, said he, prompting. Oh, yes. It's appeared on my screen anyway. Again, I'd like, just to get an idea of the background of which areas are you working in. And it will give me time for a drink.
All right.
Okay, have we got a vote?
I'm going to display them shortly. Last chance. And here we go. Displaying the results. Should be coming up.
Ah, I'm very interested in that other. That's interesting. I thought I'd done quite a good coverage there. Perhaps, yes, power generation, medical devices, industrial, and predominantly road vehicles. Okay, interesting. Well, thank you very much. So if I continue talking about 26262 and UL 4600, it would make sense to at least 30% of the people who answered there. Thanks. Okay, so what do we know? Well, one thing we know is that getting certification is not easy. Martin Lloyd, friend of mine, with Paul Reeve, very experienced people doing assessments. Back in 2010, they published a paper, some lessons learned. What they found in that case was that 75% of the companies that had started out on the assessment route, and this was for 61511 and 61508, failed. They spent money, they spent time, and they got no certificate at the end of it. It's an interesting paper because it does list the reasons, the predominant reasons why they didn't actually get a certificate at the end of it. In 2016, I was chatting to Martin and asked him, whether he could update that paper. And he said at this point, the success rate they were finding was very, very much higher. In fact, really high. And I thought, that's great. So presumably companies are getting better. Well, things are happening inside the companies, they're getting better. And he said, no, that's not actually the case. It's that the companies are now realizing the heights of the hurdles they've got to cover and have fewer are actually starting the process of going along this route. Now, we have a poll at this point, but I think I'd rather not hold that poll at this point, if that's okay, Lucian. If it's okay, I'll just carry on, because I think I've got the information I need. Good. So, yes, the success rate was much, much higher, not because companies were getting better, but because fewer of them were starting, which is, I think, quite interesting. So what's happening to these standards? And again, I have not put DO178C and things like that on here. I've just put some basic standards. There is a move towards goal-based standards. The idea being that I'm not interested how you built this product. I'm not interested in the process you put in place. I'm not interested in all I'm interested in is, have you finished up with a safe product. And UL 4600, I think, is the predominant one in that case. Oh, okay, the poll has come up. I apologize. I was going to say let's skip that poll, but anyway, let's do the poll then. Has the poll come up? It's come up on my screen.
We're approaching 50%.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Sorry. Okay, no problem.
All right, two more seconds and we'll close the poll. All right, and share results.
That is actually, I now apologize for saying that we could skip that, because that is really interesting. Yes. In fact, yes, the 23, 23, 22, 23, very much like a US presidential election, isn't it? Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so moving towards, and of course, all of these standards are based on two things. They're based on the fact that there is an underlying quality management system in accordance with ISO 16949 or whatever, and a safety culture. But I see a move very, very much in this direction. So what does this mean? We're moving from an area of prescriptive standards that says, do this, this, and this, and don't do this, whatever you do, to a thing that says, I don't care what you do. All I'm interested in is whether the final product is adequately safe. And to a large extent, this is driven by the fact that the products are becoming more complex, becoming accidental, because we're not sure about the way they work and the interactions that they have with each other, and so on. Sorry, I'm just looking at the questions out here. And yes, there's a question there which I will answer now from Asada. Are those safety standards prepared for connected systems such as connected cars, vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to vehicle? Most of them seem to be focused on static systems. That is a problem. A lot of these standards, in fact, almost all of these standards are for a particular product. There are security standards coming out now for vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure, but very few safety standards. BlackBerry QNX has got a couple of people on the standards, on the V2X standards, and that is one of the things that we're pushing. The initial thought was on the vehicle to vehicle. For those not familiar, vehicle to vehicle means that the cars will be talking to each other. So as you approach a blind junction, your car will understand that there is a car coming the other way. And vehicle to infrastructure, similarly, it will talk to the roadside posts and things. The initial assumption on that was that there was no safety connotation for that at all, which we found very, very hard to believe. And we have been pushing to get the safety side of it considered in the product. And also, of course, there's a lot of political problems. That does my Volvo car accept messages from a Ford car and accept them without question? And there's a lot of insurance type questions associated with vehicle to vehicle standardization. But you're right, most of the standards we have at the moment are dealing with a single product rather than a single system. And that is another problem. So yes, if we look at this move from prescription to goal-based, if you look at, I've taken this, I think, from 61508, and how there is a question there, how do we define adequately safe? There are actually three methods that are typically used for defining adequately safe, and perhaps I should come back. I'll come back to those at the end if I may. So, well, let's hold that question. This is one of the tables. I'm sure most of you have seen these sorts of tables. This is a table from 61508 that says various things are highly recommended or we don't care. Anything, of course, that's highly recommended, you either have to do or you have to explain why you don't do it and why what you do is better. So this is a prescriptive standard. We must, for example, if we have a SIL 3, a safety integrity level 3 system, we need a structural test coverage of 100%, branch coverage, highly recommended. So very prescriptive, tells you exactly what needs to be doing. So we're moving from prescriptive standards towards goal-based standards. I believe at the same time, and in order to handle that, we're going to have to move away from prescriptive leadership or management to goal-based leadership or management. And this, I think, is where I want to sort of emphasize in this presentation. In a prescriptive world, we can say, show me your checklist. How many of all of the 173 requirements in 61508, how many can we now check off? In a goal-based world where we don't care how the product has been developed and how it is being developed, there are no checklists. It's much more fuzzy, if you like. It's much less engineering. It's much less mathematics, although there's a lot of mathematics underneath it. Convince me that the system that we are building is adequately safe. How many of the identified hazards and risks have been mitigated? How do we know that we have identified enough hazards and risks in order to define adequately safe? So this is, I think, is one of the steps that we have to rethink the way we manage the development of a safety critical product. There are detailed questions as well as the general questions, and this is something that ISO 29119, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with that. It's a software testing standard that came out about, well, it came out in parts, and I suppose the final parts came out about 2016 or so on. It asks a question, and it puts you in puts the leadership of a project on the spot by saying, why are you bothering to do testing and verification? It costs a lot of money. You've got to buy a laboratory, probably. You've got to pay testers and what have you. Why are you doing it? And I've asked a number of companies this, actually, when I've been out working with them. And the answer the honest answer often is, well, because we've always done testing. And 61508, 26262 call for requirements-based testing. And it's a tick box. We have to do it. 29119 is much more related to what it calls risk-based testing. And that's not risks as in the safety critical risks. That's risks as in what are you trying to mitigate by doing testing or verification? You might be trying to mitigate the risk that your customer will not accept the product. You might be mitigating the risk that you will not meet a requirement on such as 26262. You might be trying to mitigate the risk of having to withdraw the product from the field after it's been launched. Each of these is a risk that you might be trying to mitigate with verification and testing. But each of these, if you explicitly said to your test group, that is the risk we're trying to mitigate, that might lead to very different test cases and testing, verification. And one thing that 29119 requires is you making that explicit. When we're doing our testing and verification, we're doing it to mitigate the following risk. And by the way, yes, 26262 part 2 gives us examples of poor safety culture, and one of those is heavy dependence on testing at the end of the production cycle. So I think in addition to the more general moving towards goal-based leadership, I think answering specific questions is something that leaders need to be able to do. Why am I paying money for a test group? What risk am I trying to mitigate? And we have also, of course, to justify that our system is now adequately safe. And I'm coming back to that question of what is adequately safe, which I see in the question box there. Okay, but how do we demonstrate it? Well, this is something where 26262 is slightly ambiguous, and for a reason that I found out when I spoke to the people who are driving it. In part 2 of 26262, it basically says that the safety case is a list of the artifacts required by the standard. It says the safety case should progressively compile the work products that are generated to support the safety argument. In part 10 of 26262, which is only informative, not normative, it actually describes what a safety case is and how it should be produced. I asked why there was this sort of conflict within the same standard, and was told by the people working on it that when the part 2 is normative, you've got to do it. Part 10 is advisory, informative. When they were putting together part 2, they were under commercial pressure to make it a small amount of work as possible for people. When they put together part 10, they could take their company hats off and put their engineering hats on and say what they actually wanted to say, which I think says something about our safety culture in standards development, actually. Okay. The safety case can go badly wrong. The Nimrod safety case, we mentioned Nimrod earlier, and this is a quotation from the Nimrod report, which I say I would certainly recommend people look at. Charles Haddon Cave QC. You can download it for free off the internet because it's a UK government document. This is a direct quote. The Nimrod safety case was a lamentable job. It was riddled with errors. It missed key dangers. It was basically a paperwork exercise. It was virtually worthless as a safety tool. The defining features of the 4 years it took to produce the Nimrod safety case are high levels of incompetence, complacency, and cynicism. So that's pretty harsh, and I think correctly pretty harsh, although it does go on to name names, which is something that was criticized at the time. Okay, well, let's just talk about the safety case and how it should be put together, because I think this becomes the key document for demonstrating that our product is adequately safe. First of all, defining the scope of the system. When we're talking about our system, what do we mean? Is the human user included or excluded? Do we assume that user is trained? Do we include field software upgrades, or are we assuming that this will be static? That once this system is in the field, it will be static. And yes, I see the question there about what is sufficient verification. We're going to have a super question time at the end of this, I can see. Okay, what do we claim? What are you claiming about your product? And again, this move towards a risk-based system seems to be a move away from, I claim that my system meets the requirements of ISO 26262 at ASIL-D, or DO178C at class so-and-so, towards our system. I claim that our system is free of unreasonable risk, with unreasonable risk being how it's defined in 26262. So that is a major change in direction, I think, for the way we manage safety products. Having defined a claim, we prepare the argument. This is my argument that we meet that claim. And we're asked by UL 4600 in particular to avoid at that point putting evidence on. Just let's put the argument together how we think the argument would be structured. 4600, I don't know if you've read 4600, but it's very, very good, and it's full of what it calls pitfalls. So things that you could fall into, traps you could fall into if you're not careful. And one of the traps they propose is collecting the data, collecting evidence before you've created the argument, because that's prone to p-hacking. P-hacking, of course, is the statistical technique whereby you've got a result, you want to demonstrate that it's correct. You try this statistical test, but you get a p-value you don't like, so you try that statistical test, you get a p-value you don't like, so you got to do another statistical test. Oh, that one gave me the answer I wanted, I'll use that statistical test. That, of course, is not an acceptable way of doing things. So yes, prepare the argument without evidence, take that argument to your certification body and say, if I presented you the argument, with evidence for this argument, would you believe me? Would it convince you? I've done that a couple of times, and typically people will come back and say, well, no, I'd need this as well, or better still, I know I don't actually need that section. I can assume that. So that reduces it. And then, of course, collect the evidence and add the evidence to the thing. That traditionally has been the way a good safety case has been developed, in accordance with EN 50128 or 50129, sorry, for the railway industry, and part 10 of 26262. I believe there is one more step, and this is something that we're working on at the moment. I think we need to add doubt. Going back to Francis Bacon, and this is rather good because if you use this in a paper at a conference or something, as I've done, it allows you to quote a paper from 1598, which gives you a record on the oldest paper quoted at the conference or something. Francis Bacon said a number of things, but in particular, the general root of superstition is that men observe when things hit and not when they miss, and they memorize when they hit and forget when they miss. And he goes on, it is the peculiar and perpetual error of the human intellect to be more moved and excited by affirmatives, by yeses, than by no's. So what this means is that if we set out to produce a safety case to demonstrate that our system is safe, then we are likely to miss evidence and argument that it is not safe. And what we have been doing recently a lot of is going through the safety cases, and is part of creating the safety case, finding three types of weakness: finding counterexamples to the claims, finding weaknesses in the evidence, and finding where the evidence doesn't support the claim. We've moved from telling someone, create a safety case to demonstrate that our system is safe, to list all the reasons that our system might not be safe, and we then attempt to eliminate them, called inductive elimination. We had enormous success with this the first time we deployed it. We have been producing safety cases within BlackBerry QNX now since 2010 on various products. A couple of years ago, I introduced this into our argument, and we found some 20-something problems that we had never noticed before in our safety cases. So that was really important. We found, as I say, 20-something problems that none of our previous safety cases had noticed. And that, of course, allowed us to take action and do things. We are now trying to drive that into the standards. One of the standards for producing the argument or representing the argument in a safety case is the goal structuring notation. And we're on the committee that's putting together the next version of the goal structuring notation standard. And we are pushing for that now to include this eliminative arguments, to say, basically what we did, instead of going and asking our people, is this process being followed? When the answer, of course, is yes, we asked, can you think of any time when this process was not completely followed? Oh yeah, actually there is a time, and when this happens and this happens, typically, yeah, this doesn't get done properly. It's changing the question around, and so that people are not falling into the Baconian trap. Now we're making the fact that there is a problem the positive thing, which people will notice, as opposed to the negative thing, which they will just pass over. There's a question there with a limit, which I might try to address now. With a limit of induction, are there methods to automatically produce confidence in a safety case aside of Baconian probabilities? Yes, we are, as I say, trying to push those into the standards at the moment. And one other representation that I like particularly is a Bayesian network notation of the safety case argument, because that allows us to express those doubts quantitatively rather than just qualitatively. So it still relies on these Baconian questions, but it's, I think, a stronger notation than the goal structuring notation. But the goal structuring notation seems to be the one that most people have used. And so that's the one people are used to. So from the MISRA guide to producing an assurance case or safety case for automotive in particular, they are looking for 3 particular things. Now, these are quotes from the MISRA document. Staff competence. And there is no question that safety engineering requires specialized knowledge, both of, well, of all 3. The area in which we're working, whether it's cars or aircraft or medicine, in software development or hardware development techniques, and in the safety competency. And that is rare, I find, which is interesting. When we had the poll earlier, a number of people were saying that that was a problem that they have. Company leadership. And this is again a quote. This is presumably the one that's most relevant to the people on the call at the moment. Compliance can only be claimed for a process or product and not for an organization. And the blind following of a process is unlikely to produce a product that is safe. Developers should always have the goals, there's that word goals again, in mind of what they're trying to achieve. And of course, the company safety culture. And this is a picture from the MISRA guidelines, and the colors haven't quite worked, but basically what they're saying is, in order to have a safety culture in the organization, the company has to start with a safety culture taken from the top of the organization. The means, have the people in the teams who are actually doing the work on this, have they got the correct tools to allow them to do this? And then in the middle there, 2 things. Safety case argument that shows that safety requirements are being met, and the rationale that shows the safety requirements are sufficient. This is the important concepts of the safety culture. I think if I go to that Nimrod report here and perhaps do a search for safety culture, oops, I can spell it correctly. As you can see coming up down the side here, safety culture is referred to in this report on the Nimrod crash, I can't count them all, a lot of times, let's say. And there's a nice quote in here, if I remember. My search is very slow when Zoom is running. I've noticed this before. Oh, 587 was it? Oh, thanks, Ian. And yes, here is a quote from James Reason, the Manchester University professor who did Reason's model. If you are convinced your organization has a good safety culture, you're almost certainly mistaken. Like a state of grace, a safety culture is something that is striven for but rarely attained. As in religion, the journey is more important than the product. So yeah, there's a slightly depressing concept there, I suppose. Yep. Okay. What does 4600 have to say? UL 4600, the autonomous vehicles standard. The role of the safety culture of development, supply chain, maintenance, and risk shall be identified. So this is not just safety culture, your safety culture. This is a safety culture from your suppliers and your maintenance organization and so on. And the pitfall here is operational management, business management, exerting control or pressure upon the roles so tasked with assuring safety. The safety culture can only come from the top. And the example they give here is normalization of deviance. Deviance is allowed to occur, and it continues to occur, and it becomes normal. It becomes the way we do things. Also from 4600, it's saying everything else being equal, whatever that means. I'm not sure exactly what that means in a standard. If your safety case meets 4600, it will also meet 26262, but not vice versa. If you've got a 26262 compliant one, it does not mean that the 4600 requirements will be satisfied. 4600's requirements for a safety case is the stronger one, and the one I think we should all be trying to strive for. Okay, so to finish up, let's go back to those three cases that we spoke about earlier. There was no question that there were numerous engineering errors in each one of them. The R101, for example, about 4 months before she set off for India, they found that she wasn't actually lighter than air. And so they had to cut her in half, put a new section in the middle, and put some extra gas bags in there. And because of the timing, she didn't get a full set of tests before they went. In each case, a problem was a schedule. On the case of the R101 trial, this is a quote from the official report. Trials were cut down to a degree that would never have been thought proper had it not been for the exigencies of time. And the quote was, "Every effort will be made to complete the ship as quickly as possible. We have no allowance in our program to cover unforeseen delays." On the Nimrod, it was even worse. 2 weeks before the product was due for the customer acceptance, only 50 of the 104 hazards had been analyzed. And that had been done over the course of 4 years. So in 4 years, they had analyzed 50. They had another 54 to do. At a review meeting that morning, Chris Lowe said there was to be a final push, and the aim was for end of week completion. On the Boeing 737 MAX 8, to emphasize that production schedule was of the utmost priority, management installed countdown clocks in their conference rooms in order to make everyone aware of key markers in the development schedule. So basically, we have here, in each case, a situation where cost and schedule have taken priority over safety and quality. This is from 26262 part 2 and gives examples indicative of a poor safety culture. And one of those is cost and schedule taking precedence over safety and quality. Just before I summarize, there is a quote that I would like to give from the R101 report, the official government report. When R01 started, she was undertaking a novel task in weather conditions worse than any to which she had ever been exposed in flight, and with the prospect of more unfavorable weather after she started. She had never gone through trials which proved by their length and conditions that she was well able to cope with a continuance of unfavorable circumstances. The program of trials drawn up by her captain had never been carried through, and the intended length of her last trial was avowedly cut down in order to provide a little more time for preparation before the date which was contemplated for her start for India. No adequate speed trials had ever been carried out, and indeed this fact was so clearly realized that an official of the Air Ministry urged that she should conduct such speed trials on her voyage to India. So the three underlying problems that we see in that system are the problems associated with schedule taking precedence over priority. So to summarize, we're not going to have time to answer all these interesting questions, I'm afraid. The complexity of modern devices makes a strict application of prescriptive development impossible. We have got to move towards goal-based development, and that means goal-based management of those products. And what we have found within QNX, BlackBerry QNX, is this can increase developers' job satisfaction significantly. For those confident and properly skilled developers, giving them this type of responsibility is something that leads to better job satisfaction. Why we're performing verification is something that we need to analyze and not say we're doing it because we do it. Engage the certification body early to agree the structure of your argument before you start to put evidence in. Yes, this is the argument we're putting forward. If we were to present evidence, would that convince you? Safety culture is essential and can thrive only with commitment from the top of the company. And as we saw in the quote from James Reason, if you think you have achieved it, then you haven't. And the management of goal-based development is going to call for a very flexible management attitude and a willingness to assess a project by new metrics. And we've got to discuss what those metrics are. On-schedule delivery is clearly one metric. That's a commercial metric, but it may not be the most important. There's been a question on the chat to ask whether we could address the questions in a document. That is something we have done before, actually, and sent out to people, and I would hope we could do that again this time. Yeah. So as far as I'm concerned, that is the end. I took this picture at the beginning of the COVID crisis when there was a panic about such things. And no. So I will hand back to Greg for summing up.
Chris, thank you. Fantastic. We covered a lot of ground. And there's a tremendous number of questions in here. So we've got about 10 minutes, and we're going to transition into that Q&A portion right now. Once again, it looks like you're familiar enough that you know how to get the questions into us, but if you'd like to send those by hashtag QNX_platform, that's adequate as well. And a general reminder that those of you who submitted questions are entered into a drawing to receive a free copy of Chris's book. And there's also an opportunity for others who are interested in getting a copy of Chris's book or learning more from BlackBerry. If you can schedule an appointment with BlackBerry and you commit to that and speak with those folks, they're going to give you a copy of the book as well. So I think we just posted in the chat a message to everyone on how you can do that. And rest assured, the content from today's session will be made available after we conclude. In the event that time does not permit us to get through all these questions, which I don't think it's going to.
Not a chance.
We've got a lot of them, Chris. But we'll pound through several of them, and we'll definitely give consideration to publishing something after that, or at the very least, we'll continue the dialogue over into Twitter. You can track this on the hashtag that I mentioned. So let's dive in here. I think we've got a bunch of them. So.
Right. Well, one question I did promise to answer at the end, if it's okay, Greg,
yeah,
was the
right
question
ahead.
about when is something adequately safe? There are three metrics often used for this. They're known as the British, the French, and the German methods. The British method is ALARP, as low as reasonably practical. So we cut up the space into those products, or those problems that are either going to happen so often or are so dramatic that they are unacceptable and we've got to fix them, no question. And then there's a region where either the problem doesn't occur very often, or when it does occur, it's not that important, it doesn't cause much damage, which are generally acceptable. What's in the middle is ALARP, as low as reasonably practical. And here we have to make a decision as to whether we can do anything about it or not. And here is where it gets pretty unpalatable, because we put a price on a human life. So say £7 million on a human life. If in order to reduce the hazard so that it will save one life per year, we have to do £8 million worth of effort, then we don't do it. If we could do it for £5 million, we do it. So that's pretty disgusting, because you have to put a price on a human life. The French method called GAMAB basically says, well, the product we're putting out is going to replace a product that presumably is in the field at the moment. It's very rare that we put out a completely new product. And so as long as we are no worse than the product we're replacing, that's good enough. That is safe enough. And then the final one, which is the German one, MEN, minimum endogenous mortality, says in a particular country, if you are alive on the 1st of January, the probability that you will not be alive on the 31st of December because of accidental things, a work accident, a sport accident, or traffic accident or something, is X. And normally it's taken to be about 2 times 10 to the minus 4. And then our system must not add more than 10% to that figure. So ALARP, GAMAB, and MEM are 3 techniques that are used to decide whether something is acceptably safe.
Got it. So 3 reasonable approaches. I think we've got a question here. I want to jump back. Ian put one in earlier. Do you have suggestions on how to address the intellectual debt question with the increasing use of libraries, and particularly open source libraries?
This is the answer is no. I do not have, and it is a concern. And particularly it's a concern when we come to machine learned systems, neural networks, and so on. And what we have been exploring there is we don't know what the neural network has learned. I mean, there are hundreds of examples of neural networks having learned things that we didn't expect. We thought they were learning the road. They were not. They were learning the advertising hoardings along the road. There is, we've been looking at some work that maps the neural network, which of course is just a set of weights with very little meaning, to things like Bayesian networks to pull out some meaning, human-defined meaning of what has been learned. And that, I think, is a start in that direction. But no, the intellectual debt, I think, is an enormous problem.
It's one we're going to have to tackle.
Yes, indeed.
A lot. Let's see. There was an interesting one up here that someone put in anonymously. Let me grab that one. In terms of liability, from a liability point of view, is there any difference why prescriptive standards are more popular?
Yeah, this brings us to the base question. There's a question I think that underlies that, which is, why are we bothering with these standards at all? Nobody that as far as I know, although the European Union has considered it but not gone ahead with it, there is no one in the world who says that I'm not going to allow your car on my road unless it meets 26262. Now, that's not true for the aviation industry. It's not true for the railway industry, I accept. Yes. But certainly in the car industry. And normally the reason is it is done for liability reasons. And I think the argument there is going to be when a problem occurs and we are perhaps in court or something, we can say, well, we followed the best practice that we know of. We followed an international standard that is the best thinking that we have at the moment on how we should have done these things, and we did it. And I don't think that will matter as we move from the prescriptive standards to the goal-based standards. I think as far as the court is concerned, and that's a pretty nasty thing to think about, but as far as the court is concerned, there was an international standard. It has been agreed by X countries. It's an ISO standard or a UL standard or whatever, and we have followed it. So please let us off.
Yeah, that kind of falls in line, I think, with a point Mohanad was making in his comment. And I don't want to belabor this one, but I think he's got a good point. He said moving to goal-based standards from more descriptive ones or a checklist mentality, doesn't this move the liability of having a safety failure in the system from the standard itself to can be completely on the test team in the company? So I think he's kind of alluding to that same point there.
Now, of course, I think a note has just come up on the chat, and I think this is true. The prescriptive standards are much, much easier for both the company and for the auditor. It's easy to go through a checklist and say, did you do X? Did you do Y? Did you do Z? Did you not do A, B, and C? Fine. Okay, here's your certificate. Now that is changing dramatically.
Indeed.
Although there's one question I would like to answer. There's just come up. Are you saying QNX is pushing the add doubts in UL 4600? No, we are pushing to add doubts to the goal structuring notation standard And the goal structuring notation standard is called up as one of the possibilities in 4600.
Very good. Well, we are approaching the end of the hour here. I don't know. I'm fraught. I'm torn because there's a lot of tremendous quality standards in here. But I think we probably want to transition because we do have a giveaway. You know,
indeed, and I would like to commit that yes, I will try to answer all of the questions. If I get a list of the questions, which I assume I can, I'll try to answer them in writing.
Fantastic. We'll make that happen then. So we'll extract the balance of these and we'll get back to everyone. So rest assured we will address them.
Good.
Perfect. So I think we're going to go to once again. Okay, perfect. We got it up here now. This is the site. If you're interested in signing up to learn more about what BlackBerry has to offer and gain some insights, we'll be offering a free book is there as well. So if you follow this media link, please by all means schedule that appointment and you can get your copy as well from Chris. So right now we're going to go ahead and on with our wheel of names. So I'm going to turn this over to Lucian briefly to let him select our winner.
Thank you, Greg. And looks like the lucky winners and from the most active users of today is Mohammed. So Mohammed, you'll be getting a link to that. So all the people that were posting questions in the Q&A will be taken out offline via email. Back to you, Greg.
All right. Thank you, Lucian.
Oh, that was tremendous.
Always entertaining, right? The excitement builds. Brief moment of game show.
Yeah. So, excellent.
No, that's perfect. Well, thank you for taking the time to join today's virtual conference. Our next session on December 9th is going to cover how to decrease costs, improve safety, and reduce environmental impact using 3D digital twins. And I'd like to invite everyone to visit our events page to check out some of our upcoming educational broadcasts brought to you by IoT World. So special thanks to our sponsor today, BlackBerry QNX, for this educational session, and a round of applause for Chris Hobbs. It was a fantastic session, Chris. A lot of value coming out of this. If you have suggestions on a future topic or otherwise, we always welcome your feedback. So please drop us a message and let us know. And if you like what you heard today, we invite you to subscribe to our newsletter, YouTube channels, and follow us on Twitter at IIoT_world. This concludes our program for today. Thank you for joining.